Ed Miliband, thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Now, Labour has said today that it's promising to spend an extra £28 billion a year for a decade to make the economy more green. Now, that's a huge amount of money to borrow. Just how affordable is it when the government's already borrowed record amounts to deal with the pandemic?
It is absolutely affordable. And, you know, the unaffordable choice is not to invest. Because if we don't invest in tackling the climate crisis, we will store up massive costs for the future, for future generations, as they have to cope with the appalling consequences of climate change. And if we do make these investments, and I was talking about this yesterday in relation to the steel industry, it can create hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs across our country in helping to build the economy of the future, in our manufacturing industry, in creating the green spaces that we need, retrofitting and insulating homes. This is about the economy of the future. It's absolutely the right thing to do. It's what President Biden is seeking to do in the United States. I think it's a bold, imaginative and really important move that Rachel Reeves has announced today.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the money, because yesterday you announced £3 billion for the steel industry to decarbonise that particular industry, which may be great for the planet, but there is a price to pay, isn't there? People are already facing higher taxes. Under Labour, they'd have to go up even more, wouldn't they?
Well, no, what we're saying is it's right to borrow to invest. So take the steel industry, really important industry. It's a strategic industry for our national security. It's the foundation of our manufacturing industry. The best estimates are it will cost $6 billion to make this industry a green industry, because at the moment it's responsible for more than 10% of our manufacturing emissions. Now, we could decide not to have a steel industry, which means that tens of thousands of people will lose their jobs. Or we can decide, as the choice Labour's made, to do a partnership with the private sector to invest for the future, as other countries are doing, and we can have a clean, green steel industry. And I think that's the right choice. It's the right choice for our communities. It's the right choice for our economy. And it means we don't end up relying on imported steel from countries like China.
But ultimately, we'll have to pay for it. And also, it can't happen overnight, can it? Decarbonising a whole industry may be the right thing to do, but we have to take it very delicately, the same as transitioning out of fossil fuel industries, or jobs will go. There are so many jobs tied up in these industries.
Well, look, you are right about that, definitely. And, you know, I think what's important from Labour this week is it's about a plan for the future. It's about a long-term plan. And goodness knows, when we see some of the chaos that this government is presiding over, our country needs a long-term plan. You're right, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a decade-long plan. It's a decade-long plan that Rachel Reeves has announced today. It's the same that I had announced yesterday in relation to the steel industry. And it's about working with business. We have many great businesses in our country. And you know what they're crying out for? I see this as Shadow Business and Energy Secretary. They're crying out for a sense of a plan. They're crying out for a sense of a framework and a sense of certainty. And that's what Labour is providing.
Well, yes, and the government says it's got its own 10-point plan, of course. And what about COP26, which the UK is hosting? We've heard today that the Australian Prime Minister says he may not attend. We don't know if the Chinese Premier will be there. How important is it that the world leaders show up? And how would you go about persuading them to attend?
Well, I think it's very, very worrying that that is happening and that you've got world leaders potentially not coming. Look, I'm afraid to say the government hasn't taken this summit with nearly the seriousness that it deserves. And we've seen a series of missteps from the government, cutting overseas aid, which has made vulnerable countries think that we are not serious about helping them to make the transition, not having a green recovery here at home, telling other countries to power past coal, but flirting with a new coal mine ourselves. I'm afraid time is very short, and this is a summit in peril. Now, what does the government need to do? It needs to deliver for vulnerable countries. 10 years ago, we promised to help those vulnerable countries make the adaptation to climate change. We've still not delivered the finance. They need to deliver on that. They need to have no quarter with giving a free pass to countries like Australia if they're not going to face up to their climate commitments. We need to say to them, you've got to face up to their climate commitments. We've just done a trade deal with them where we allowed them to drop their climate commitments. And crucially, we've got to deliver a green recovery here at home. The Prime Minister has got to take this much, much more seriously. We need all the senior members of government applying themselves to this in a way they frankly haven't before.
You say that, and yet they would say we've got world-beating targets for getting down our carbon emissions. They would say we've announced an end to the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030, 10 years ahead of schedule. They'll talk about promising to quadruple the amount of offshore wind capacity within a decade. They would say they're doing their bit.
Well, what they've done is they've announced targets which, you're right, are internationally very respectable. And I say to them it's good that they've done that. The problem is there is a yawning chasm between the targets and the delivery, because they're not delivering. You know, take this issue of retrofitting or insulating homes. We're facing a gas price crisis. What could we have done to have avoided this? If we'd insulated our homes, we could have cut gas demand by up to 25% in people's homes and created lower bills and lower carbon emissions. But year after year, we've been saying to government, take these measures. These could create jobs. We could help families, and they haven't done that. So I agree with you, actually. Internationally, we're doing okay in terms of the targets, but we've got to deliver. And the announcement that Labour has made today, this investment announcement, is exactly what I hope government does, frankly, so that we can deliver our promises to the British people on the climate crisis.
Ed Miliband, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.